What? Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Unearthing Black Garden Clubs in America and celebrating with us the Ethel Early Clark Ethel Day. You notice the emblem here is gold and Nile green. That was the symbol of the garden clubs. And we are honoring Ethel Early Clark and all of the gardeners in our past, present, and future. My name is Guina Hammond. I work with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, and I have the pleasure of moderating our talk this morning. We give thanks to our sponsors and our supporters, and we thank you all so much for being here. I see that we have folks from Lunenburg, PA. We have folks from Kennett Square, from Philadelphia, from Virginia, from Maryland, from New York. Welcome. We give special thanks to Aaron Doherty from Chanticleer, from Brian Thomas Nowak from Morris Arboretum, from Stephanie from the Morris Arboretum, and again, myself, I am Guina Hammond. Good morning, Philadelphia. Thank you so much for being here. Our garden club and vicinity. You all are the oldest garden club continuously operating in America. You're here in Philadelphia. We have a special guest with us today, Lillian Ransom, Judge Lillian Harris Ransom. She was the past president of our garden club and vicinity in Philadelphia, and she'll be joining us here today. Thank you all so much. We are so excited to be here. Let's see, who else is joining us? Good morning from Norfolk, Virginia. So excited this program is happening. Indeed, we're going to share so much history and knowledge and wisdom, again, for past, present, and future, and all of the efforts that everyone has contributed, specifically African-American women, to this movement of really beautifying our communities and making our communities rich. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors. We've got such a great lineup today. I will be joined by Abra Lee, Judge Lillian Ransom Harris. I said that in the reverse. Wambui Ippolito, Teresa Speight, Shaun Spencer-Hester, and behind the scenes, we have Brian and Aaron, and all of us really, really working hard to make this a success. So again, thank you for joining us. I see folks again from our garden club and vicinity representing here on this event. Who else is here? Let's see. Philadelphia, PHS, all right. We have a whole garden network in Philadelphia. We have tremendous community gardens, so many folks really working together to make this event happen. So I'm gonna get started in a moment. Again, I wanted to welcome you all and also bring your attention to this beautiful flower that I have behind me. And it is the symbol of the garden clubs, the Black garden clubs. And it was the peace rose, and that was the opportunity for folks really to gather and connect with an emblem that could be represented throughout. So I do have someone joining us from South Jersey, again, the Garden Club and vicinity in Philadelphia. And I'm ready to begin. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Again, my name is Guina Hammond. I work with PHS. I am a gardener and a holistic health educator. And I have the pleasure today of hosting this wonderful, wonderful activity of unearthing Black gardens here in America. And I am accompanied by my esteemed colleagues, Abra Lee, Wambui Ippolito, Judge Lillian Harris Ransom, Teresa Speight, and Shaun Spencer-Hester. And together we're going to talk about garden clubs, the Black garden clubs, and our history and our contributions really to America and to the gardening community. And really have you all understand that gardening in the African-American community has always been an activity of activism. It's been a time and a place where we've been able to bring people together really with a common goal in mind, really to uplift our communities and really share in beauty and stabilization. So we've done many, many wonderful things. Today, I'm going to be joined by Abra, and Abra is going to talk with us about Ethel Early Clark. So Abra, she is a writer, a landscape architect, a designer, a arborist, and the principal founder of Conquer the Soil, where it's a community of gardeners who come together and talk about folklore, history, garden design, and our present and future. Abra has been featured in the New York Times. She's also been featured in Wildflower magazine, and she is just so knowledgeable about the history of Black garden clubs. And I do want to say too that Abra really has been the thought behind all of us coming together today to make this presentation happen. So Abra, thank you for joining us. In addition to Abra joining us, I will also be joined by Judge Lillian Harris, Judge Lillian Harris Ransom. I keep switching those names. And Judge Ransom is the granddaughter of Lillian Somerville Jones, who was the president of her garden club in Portsmouth, Virginia. And Lillian learned gardening from her grandmother, and they grew mostly all of their food growing up. And so Lillian also is the past president of the Our Garden Club of Philadelphia and vicinity, and she is a board member with PHS. So she has a lot of wisdom to share with us. So Abra, please, let's begin.
Thank you, Guina. Good morning. Good morning to everyone. Guina, with your fabulous introduction, you gave me way more credentials than I actually qualify for. So I want to just politely and lovingly correct that I am not a landscape architect.
You're right.
Give me 1 second. I'm just going to share my screen. And also, I do teach some up and coming landscape architects at my class at Auburn University. The Dynamic 9 is what I call these young people because they're so dynamic, and they will indeed be doing a design for the PHS flower show based on a woman named Ethel Early Clark, a Harlem Renaissance writer who ran in the same circles as Ann Spencer. And of course, Shaun, her granddaughter, will be here to join us today. So thank you for calling me that, but my education had to end in horticulture because that's about all I could pay attention for. So shout out to the landscape architects that are here today. So I'm going to get us started. Y'all, we're going to hop in this 1981 DeLorean like Marty McFly from Back to the Future and get through 1932 to 2022 by 11:15 Eastern time. Can you believe it? Well, believe it. Here we go. The people that you see in front of you, these are the Fab Four. I told you about my Dynamic 9, those young people down at Auburn in landscape architecture. But before the Dynamic 9 ever existed, the people that you see before you today are the four founders of what was then called the Negro Garden Club of Virginia. And about 10 years later, that name just changed to the Virginia Garden Clubs. They dropped the Negro part. So I want to introduce you to, on the left, in the green glasses, and shout out to Morgan, my wonderful, fabulous artist who is able to help us do this beautiful visual storytelling and bring color to these wonderful people who lived colorful lives, who would have just been black and white, but Morgan is the baddest in the game, and here we are. So Mr. PJ Chesson in his green glasses was an educator, a principal in the city of Norfolk. And in purple, we have a gentleman named William Cooper, Dr. William Cooper, who was head of extension for Hampton University. Now, the two people I mentioned next are two people that we could talk about all day long, but we don't got all day long. So Asa Sims, the gentleman with the red background, the legendary horticulturist for Hampton University, a floriculture professor, also who was the first secretary for the Garden Club, the Negro Garden Club of Virginia, and also their state advisor. And Ethel Early Clark, the woman in yellow, the woman of the day that you see here, was the first president of these garden clubs. Now, they gathered on April 22nd, 1932 at Hampton University. 7 clubs gathered and decided, you know what, we're better off as a federation. And that is what they did. And by the end of the year, 17 clubs had joined. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to make sure that they shared information across the state and also organize within themselves. And these are the 4 founders of the Negro Garden Club of Virginia. Now, one of the people who I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't get into, I want to mention this. There's a woman named Meredith Henny Baker who has written a beautiful article on Ethel Early Clark. You can find it online. And it goes into details about her life. Ethel Early Clark, her career was in the food service industry. She was president of the Virginia Food Service Association. So a cafeteria worker, those wonderful people who feed the children at lunchtime. But one of the people Meredith introduced me to who doesn't get enough credit that deserves it is the one that you see on the left, a woman named Millie B. Paxton from Roanoke, Virginia. And in 1929, she founded the Ideal Garden Club in Virginia with 32 members. And the reason I show her today is because at the first meeting, the first annual convention, so they're founded in 1932, 1933, they're meeting regularly and they have their annual meeting. Millie B. Paxton gets on the stage and shares the history of the Ideal Garden Club that she founds in 1929 before there's a federation. So when we talk about Ethel Early Clark, we must mention her sister in gardening, Mrs. Millie B. Paxton. Also, Florence Chesson, the lady who is in the lavender today, she is the wife of P.J. Chesson, one of the 4 founders that I mentioned to you. And like Millie B. Paxton, this is a woman who is civically engaged in her community. She is active in the NAACP, and she is the vice president. She is the first vice president. So she is vice president to Ethel Early Clark in these Negro garden clubs. And finally, on the right, there's a woman named Ruth B. McCoy, who ends up becoming the 2nd vice president. And this is at their 2nd anniversary. Ruth B. McCoy is being handed a trophy by the gentleman, Asa Sims, who I mentioned to you earlier, the iconic Asa Sims, who worked with these ladies for decades and decades and decades. And I literally mean that, from 1930s well into the 1960s when he passes away, and helps them to continue to organize clubs. Now, when I talk about these women and their activism, I want to mention this quickly, some of the things that they did in terms of community engagement. So some of the things that they did were things like registering people to vote, the registering people for the right to vote. So it wasn't just all gardening for them. And this comes to the forefront during their 10th anniversary. And the woman that you see on the left is named Lillian Hughes Savage. Lillian Hughes Savage. By the 10th anniversary in 1942, she is the president of these garden clubs, and she gives a speech to the crowd. And in this speech, she talks about how, and I quote, "We pledged ourselves that we would engage in this much needed work of beauty. The work is in our hands. We must carry on and complete the job. We must overbalance ugliness with beauty." So what kind of ugliness are they talking about in 1942? Well, let me tell you, they're talking about, it is the Jim Crow era, the beginnings of that. They are talking about, this is a few years after the unofficial launch of the civil rights movement. The Scottsboro boys have gone on trial. Millie B. Paxton sends money down to Alabama to defend these young men who are falsely accused of raping a white woman on a train. Also, overbalancing the ugliness of beauty, it is World War II. It is going on. Bombs are dropping all over Europe, and America is in a crisis. Now, Lillian Hughes Savage delivers this very empowering address at the 10th anniversary. And I must state that also Following that anniversary in 1943, the handbook of the Negro Garden Club of Virginia was released. And you'll see a picture of that a little bit later with Henry Skinner. And I must also acknowledge the iconic Dr. H. Hamilton Williams, Harold Hamilton Williams of Cornell, who coordinates and put this book together. And that is the gentleman that you see on the right. And he even gets First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to write the preface to this book. And we're going to move on. Now, it was activism, it was fighting for civil rights, and it was also competition. I'm about to show up my neighbor. I'm going to win this thing and show you that I am the greatest gardener in Virginia, if not the United States, and if not the world. So what kind of competitions were these women getting into? Well, I'm going to tell you some of the things that they did with their competition. And this is one of the ads that you see here to your right. They distributed flowers and vegetable garden seeds to school children. There were competitions for that. Who's going to get these flowers and seeds out to the kids? They designed landscapes. They made speeches on gardening before organizations such as the YWCA and the State Teachers Association. They planted trees and shrubs along roadside entrances and highways in their community. And they cleaned up lots for the use of vegetable gardens and playgrounds. These are just some of the things that these women did. And obviously, as you see, they got to the money, y'all, giving out over $600 in cash prizes in this ad from the late 1940s, 1950s, where they're having a garden club competition. And as I wrap this up, I want to also acknowledge that these garden clubs didn't just stop with women. These women were so organized, they also brought children into the mix. And men's, they helped to organize men's garden clubs and co-ed garden clubs with Black people all over Virginia, and they also worked on race relations. And some of the contests, these are some of the winners from the Children's Garden Clubs. And I want to talk about some of the things they did in their contests. They had hat exhibitions, these young people did. They had window garden exhibitions. They had flower short courses, and potted plants were given as prizes. And also there were sweepstake prizes and blue ribbons awarded. So with that being said, I know that was a very quick history, and I'm gonna tell y'all this, everything ain't on Google. And if we want to know more about these women, we have to ask. We gotta ask our mamas, grandmama's mama, open up those attics. And if you know a story, I should tell, if you know a story that should be shared about these garden club women, please contact me or any of the women that you see today and Shaun Spencer-Hester at the Ann Spencer Garden Museum, because we would love to share more. So this final picture is, of course, the icon Ethel Early Clark and her Big Lick Garden Club. And here they are with an award-winning floral design where they won the sweepstakes prize. So with that, I am going to pass it over to the Honorable Judge Lillian Harris Ransom, who is a legacy child of the Garden Clubs of Virginia, a native of Virginia herself. And she will tell you about her iconic grandmother. We overuse that word in 2022, but not today, y'all. We mean ICONIC, iconic. I hope I spelled that right, because that's exactly what you're witnessing today with these people. So Judge Ransom, when you are ready, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to you. And if she hasn't joined yet, Brian, just let me know.
Judge Ransom is here and we're hoping we can get her connected.
Okay.
Okay. All right, are you ready to hear from me now?
Yes.
All right. So, good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here. A few technical challenges, but other than that, I am ready to go. I want to thank Ms. Lee for that wonderful introduction. And I want to tell you how pleased I am to be able to be here with you today to share in the celebration of the 90th anniversary of the Negro Garden Club of Virginia and its first president, Ethel Early Clark. My grandmother, as Ms. Lee started to tell you, was a member of the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth, Virginia, and that is actually what I'm going to talk to you about today. When I knew her, I was in early elementary school, and I would go and visit with her during the summer when garden clubs typically don't meet. So I did not know much about her garden club activities until I actually began to research for this project. Now, When I began my research, I'm going to tell you, I was introduced to a whole new side of her life, and I was introduced to the dynamic women that she worked with who did many of the projects that Ms. Lee talked to you about. I will share with you some of the research that I found, and I will tell you that the period that I'm going to cover is from 1942 to 1971. I'll be speaking fairly quickly because there is lots of information, but I want you to have the benefit of the research that I was able to come up with. Most of the articles that I have were from a newspaper called the Norfolk Journal and Guide. That newspaper was the African-American newspaper that was based in the Tidewater area, and it actually began publication in 1916. All right. Now, the work of the garden clubs, and in this case in particular, I'm gonna try to share my screen. Okay. All right. Here. Share. Yep. Okay. There we go. All right. So my emphasis is on the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth, Virginia. I do want to tell you that when I spent time with my grandmom in the summer, she was only grandmom. So it wasn't until I began to do the research in the last year on this particular project that I learned what an exciting life she had outside of the work that she had at her print shop. She was an entrepreneur who ran her own print shop, and I was able to actually find in the classified ads, on the left, you will see the ad for the Somerville Printery and Mrs. Lillian S. Jones, which is my grandmother. And these were two of her business cards that I was able to find as well. All right. Oh, got it. Okay, now, how do I move it? This is a picture of my hold it, hit too many of them, but this is a picture of my grandma. She, at various stages of her life, and she was very, very important in my life and in the life of the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth, Virginia. I'm going to start in 1942, where the Community Garden Club joined with the Norfolk Journal and Guide to sponsor a victory garden contest. Some of you may be aware of the fact that during World War II, the United States had a national initiative to get residents to grow their own fruits and vegetables and herbs. The Community Garden Club encouraged all people to participate. They actually judged the gardens twice in that year, and the prize winners got either US bonds or US stamps. We're going to move next to February of 1945. In this article, it talks a little more about civic engagement. The speaker for this program was Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris talked about the importance and the significance of the symbols in the United States flag. He talked about the importance of the colors, what the stars meant, what the stripes meant, and he gave a great deal of information to the Garden Club members. One of the things that happened at that meeting after Mr. Harris finished his presentation was that the article notes that a donation had been made by the Garden Club to the Day Nursery, and that fruits had also been provided to the old folks' home. All right, the next slide is not from the newspaper, but is in fact from the meeting of the Portsmouth City Council. In that minute recording, it shows that the Civics Club of the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth, Virginia, addressed the City Council, highlighting the need for the installation of curbs and gutters in the Negro sections of the town, noting that the streets were breeding places for flies and mosquitoes. And as is common, that request was referred to the city manager. So I can't tell you what actually happened, but the Community Garden Club was at the forefront of asking for things that would make the whole community better. When we get to June of 1948, this article reports about the third annual community carnival that the club sponsored. And the day promised to be a day full of activities and fun events for all comers. In May of 1949, the city of Portsmouth declared a cleanup effort that was to be held from May the 15th through the 29th. The Garden Club took the initiative of encouraging all garden clubs and its members and the general population to support the effort to make Portsmouth a city beautiful. In November of 1949, there was an educational activity. The featured speaker is pictured here. Her name was Ethel Crickmer. Ms. Crickmer was a local florist in the Portsmouth area. She talked with the members of the garden club about plants and their care. And she also demonstrated how to make arrangements for mantles, like fireplace mantles, and for tabletops. When we moved to December of 1949, we find that the public was invited to the Christmas show that was sponsored by the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth, Virginia. Of note here is that two of the judges were Asa Sims, who was the founder of the Negro Garden Clubs of America, and Ms. Crickmore, who was the speaker at the previous meeting. And I can tell you that at that point, Grandma Jones was listed as a hostess for that show, for that flower show. In December of 1951, red, white, and blue ribbons were awarded at the Holiday Flower Show. Grandma received a blue ribbon in the potted plants category. I don't know what her plants were, but she received a blue ribbon there. And of particular importance for our discussion is that awards were given to junior gardeners. There were awards given in the area of dried arrangements, of door decorations, and miniature arrangements. All of those were in an effort to encourage junior members to participate. When we moved to May of 1954, we find that the flower show had been moved to the spring, and it promised to be bigger and better than ever. Any of you who have ever worked on flower shows know that it is a committee-driven event. So just listen to this and see if you recognize anything. The committees for the flower show were the registration committee, the classifications committee, the exhibits committee, the hostess committee, the door prize committee, and the clerks committee. I had to smile when I read that because I knew that the flower shows that I have been involved in here in Philadelphia have many of the same categories. We'll move next to April of 1955. The speaker there was for that regular meeting was from the Portsmouth Health Department, and his topic was how to keep the city clean. At this meeting, the important thing that I want to bring to your attention was that the members of the Community Garden Club agreed to attend the very first meeting of the District 1 meeting of the Virginia Federation of Garden Clubs. And it's also noted that several members of the Junior Gardeners Club were also in attendance. When we moved to November of 1955, we noticed that there were two speakers, one from a local nursery who talked about the proper time to prune plants. He talked about how to set plants and how best to fertilize the plants. The other speaker was a librarian from the local high school. And I will tell you that at that meeting, it was reported that the Garden Club members made plans to beautify the community library and the local YMCA in connection with the upcoming holiday. When we move a year later to November 1956, Grandma at that point was the secretary of the club. The club hosted the semi-annual meeting of the Virginia Federation of Garden Clubs. The featured speaker that day shared a detailed presentation on the cultivation of African violets. It was also reported that members of the Community Garden Club had helped to organize a new garden club in the area. When we moved to May of 1958, the featured speaker for that meeting was Mrs. Triplett. All right, Mrs. Triplett talked about the history of African American garden clubs in the United States. And she noted that the first such club had been organized in Athens, Georgia in the late 1880s. The speaker also shared that it was in 1924 that the first African-American garden club was organized in the Tidewater area of Virginia. The article went on to report that the club had organized a citywide garden tour that included visits to 16 gardens. And it also noted that the club made a donation to the United Negro College Fund. When we get to May of 1964, Grandmom was the president of the club at that point. The featured speaker talked about decorating windowsills, and it was interesting because the speaker talked about orienting the design in your windowsill so that it would benefit those people who lived inside as opposed to the people who were passing by on the street. Of additional note is that a field trip was planned to Azalea Gardens, which is a still existing public garden in nearby Norfolk, Virginia. In December of 1969, the Garden Club had its regular December meeting. At the meeting itself, they designed Christmas holiday decorations, and following the meeting, there was the holiday party with a gift exchange. And then finally, for the Garden Club activity itself, in June of 1971, when Grandmom was still the president, they agreed on the meeting for their closing of the year. Their meeting was to be in June, and it was at the home of one of the members. So as you can see from this brief summary of the 30 years covered by this report, the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth was actively involved in civic endeavors, in educational activities for its members, and in sponsoring flower shows. I also want to share with you my experience with garden clubs here in Philadelphia. I belong to our Garden Club of Philadelphia and vicinity, which was founded in 1939. That garden club is believed to be the oldest continuously operating garden club in the United States. We do many of the activities that have been mentioned in relation to the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth. We have a flower show every 2 years. We work with juniors. We participate in the Philadelphia Flower Show. We do community activities. We provide exhibits, designs each year for the Ronald McDonald House. We beautify nursing homes and just do many of the kinds of activities. In terms of my involvement with this club, I have to say it was fascinating to me that it was my involvement with our Garden Club of Philadelphia and vicinity was very similar to the path that my grandmom took. When I joined the club in 2003, I was a member of the club. And then I began to volunteer for committees, like host or to chair or do other kinds of things that needed to be done. And then I assumed the officer position. So right now I am the immediate past president of our Garden Club of Philadelphia and vicinity and still take a very active role. The final thing that I want to share with you is this picture from 2019. And this is the very last time that our group, the Garden Club of Philadelphia and vicinity, was able to meet as a group. This was our holiday meeting, and it was obviously just before COVID. So since December of 2019, we have continued to meet on a regular basis by way of Zoom. So we are still going strong and looking forward to participating this year in the Philadelphia Flower Show, as well as we're working on our own flower show, which we expect to present in 2023. So that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this very important information with you. And now I will return the program to the hostess. Thank you.
Judge Ransom, thank you so much. Thank you. I really enjoyed the articles that you shared with us. It really shows, the history and also capturing the history. I find it really interesting that there were so many newspaper articles about the contributions of the garden clubs happening. I think that's really powerful. We wonder if others have any questions for you. I know that you're ready to take any questions at this time. Let's see
Yes.
in the chat if there are any questions for you.
I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, so there is a question or maybe a comment. It says, I wonder about the archives for these garden clubs. I am a historian, so I always want to know how we are assuring that future generations will have materials to better understand our histories. And so again,
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. One of the things that we all have found as we have tried to recapture African-American history, not only as the garden clubs, but generally, that it is not captured. It is mostly in somebody's storage box in the attic or in the basement, or some scrapbook that grandmom had that's back in a corner someplace. I do want to again acknowledge the benefit that we had of being able to access the Norfolk Journal and Guide. That was the Black newspaper. It covered national news, but it also covered things that were of importance to people who had interest in what was going on in the African-American community. As in so much of the world, it's certainly in this country, things that are of importance to the African-American community, sometimes frequently is not reported in the public press, in the larger press. So it's a matter of talking to grandmom if she's still alive, talking to your aunties if they're still alive, your uncles, anybody who knows, make an oral history. And then I think Ms. Lee has already asked if you can get your hands on things that document the history of the various garden clubs. It would be very helpful if you would share them with her, and then we can kind of get them in one place.
Thank you so much. That's so important. That archival history is super, super important. One other question, Judge Ransom, someone asked if your grandmother taught you or introduced you to gardening.
Well, I tell you, she was grandmom. I mean, she ran a print shop. The garden clubs do not meet during the summer. I remember that in her yard, she had fragrant roses and peonies that shed all over every place. And I remember them having ants, so I wasn't all that thrilled with the peonies, but we did not do gardening. I did not learn about this phase of her life. I knew she was special, but I mean, she was granny. She was special because she was granny, okay? It wasn't until I started doing the research for this project that I learned about the important contributions that she and the other phenomenal women that she worked with made to the city that they called their home. So I guess the short answer is no, she really didn't, because we didn't have that opportunity.
For sure. You know, and as we think about the activism in the community and the activism that these garden clubs really participated in and spearheaded, the question is today in the garden clubs, how are we dealing with climate change and are any other activist activities occurring in these garden clubs to really make forefront the issues of today?
I think that at least in our garden club of Philadelphia and vicinity, what we do is have speakers come in on a regular basis who can keep us up to date on how to manage some of the current issues, as you've mentioned, climate change, all right? We've talked about that. We've talked about, there are several of our members who are very actively involved in community gardening, as the Community Garden Club of Portsmouth was encouraging people to do. They have plots where people can garden and raise their own food and share with others, you know. So I think those are some of the kinds of things that we are looking at this point, to inform ourselves, to make sure that we are well educated and can make a statement where the opportunity presents itself.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Judge Ransom.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Thank you very much too.
Thank
I am
you.
going to sign out now, but I wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful day. I think this is going to be a great learning experience, and I am very excited to have been offered the opportunity to be a part of it. All right, take care.
Thank you. We'll see you later. You'll
All right.
join us for our question and answer again a little later. Now we have the pleasure of working with Wambui Ippolito and Teresa Speight. And Wambui, she is the first African woman to win the 2021 Best in Show Award with the Philadelphia Flower Show. So we're very, just so proud of her and her work. Wambui, she is a native Kenyan. She was born and raised in Kenya, and she was influenced by gardening by her grandmother, by her mother in Nairobi, and her grandmother in the countryside, and the landscapes, the natural landscapes of East Africa. Wambui is a graduate of the New York Botanical Garden School of Horticulture. And in Veranda magazine, she was named one of the 11 revolutionary female landscape designers and architects to know. Wambui is a lecturer internationally, and she is the founder of the BIPOC Hort Group, a multicultural professional organization that has membership in the United States, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and the Caribbean. She lives in New York City, where she concentrates on urban garden design, public spaces, and large estates. So we're so excited to be working with her, and she's going to share with us the horticulture at the Ann Spencer Garden. And then we have Terry here with us, and Terry is a native Washingtonian. She is an author, a former head gardener for the city of Fredericksburg, Virginia. She is a writer, a landscape, a writer, a freelance writer, a podcaster, and garden visionary. She is a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, GardenCom International, and she is the president of Jambali Amani Garden Collective, an online garden club. She is a true steward of the land, and Terry shares her passion on her website, Cottage in the Court. Terry has a new book out, and we're celebrating her new book, Black Flora, and you can find her book on Amazon and Bloom Imprint. So welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Guina. Thank you to everybody who's here today. Thank you to Judge Ransom. I learned so much, and we miss you. Terry and I and Shaun and I are in Ann Spencer's little office here in Lynchburg, so it would have been great to have you in this room with us. So I'm going to try and share my screen, and if we have a problem, I'm sure you will all let me know. One second here. So I'm going to approach this from a horticulturalist's perspective, because that is what I love. I love plants, and I love the space, the form, and the texture of this very beautiful garden in Lynchburg, where I am today, a garden that I have dreamed about visiting and that I finally got to see with my own eyes yesterday. So years and years before I met Shaun, before I met Abra, before I met Terry, I learned about the Ann Spencer Garden, and I did it through my own research. When in school, learning about landscape design, landscape architecture, I never learned anything about African-American design or Native American design. So I went into libraries, I Googled, I did everything I could to figure out what African-American women were doing. And I did this because one of the first people to ever talk to me about gardening in America was an African-American woman, an elderly African-American woman who was a concert pianist. Her name was Ruth Norman. She was a very famous concert pianist and composer based in Washington, DC. She lived in Shepherd Park, where I lived with my family when we moved here. And when I would go to her house for piano lessons, I would see all these beautiful gardens in Shepherd Park that were all owned by African Americans. And it wasn't until yesterday when this incredible emotional connection happened for me when I was walking through Ann Spencer's house with Shaun. And I realized that I was walking through a space and through a garden that reminded me of the gardens that I saw, 30 years ago in Washington, D.C., when I was walking through those gardens in where all these wonderful African Americans gardened and lived and spent their time. So this is Ann Spencer's garden. Again, I approach it from space, form, and texture. And so when I came here and I looked at this small space, it amazed me at how organized it was, how Ann Spencer organized this space to give you this illusion of a grand space. And for me, as a garden designer, as a horticulturalist, this is always an indication of how people understand space, how to organize it, how to move through a space, and what to capture with your optic as you move through the space. So this photo here is an early photo of the garden, which reminds me very much of a Tuscan garden, with the use of the height, the symmetry, and all those layered textures that those of us who love gardens, want to see when we move through a space. So this was the first thing that hit me way back before I met any of these wonderful ladies, was how the space was organized. So this is a current photograph of a part of the garden today. And on the right is a photograph that I took yesterday when we were walking through the space. And when I look at this and I remember those gardens in Washington, D.C. and Shepherd Park, I'm reminded of how intelligent these people were, how vast and how deep their knowledge base was. Because when you are growing up in Jim Crow in America, in an America that has historically disallowed your people from learning, from access, this is what you are able to produce when you were pushed down so hard. So this to me was just, it was so emotional for me to see this with my own eyes yesterday. And also to go through the plant list, because a plant list, as all horticulturalists know, the ground, what is on the ground is what is in the ground is what makes the garden. And, Bill Thomas, I know you're here. Thank you so much for always supporting us. Wave Hill, I saw you in here. Thank you so much for supporting us. When you look at this plant list and you see how, the Deutzias are used, the Mahonia right now, which is in bloom, Carria, the boxwoods for structure, the ilexes, the Cornus Florida, which was the first thing that I saw when we pulled up. And Shaun said that her father planted. Was it your father, Shaun, who planted? Her father planted the cornus outside. The hydrangeas. The lace cap hydrangeas, and all these little scillas that I saw in the Chionodoxa, strewn all throughout the garden. It just made me know that when Ann Spencer was doing this, she wasn't doing this for the moment. This was something that was going to last and to be seen by people like me and my children, my child, and other people's children. So the idea that a garden outlasts us, and the idea that what we put in the ground will take a new form, 20, 30, 40, 50 years after we have died, that there will be a new form, but still holding the identity, our identity. As I sit in this room, as I walk throughout this garden, I feel Ann Spencer in the space, because that is what we do as gardeners, as horticulturalists. When you walk through a beautiful estate, you feel the people who were in that space, who created that space, who put the structures in that space. So the plant list was just incredible for me to see, the initial, foundational plant list. So this is a picture of the Cornus Floridas that are in blooming right now. These pictures I took yesterday. And I mean, it's so beautiful. And if you haven't been down here, please be down here. Now, please come down here. I do want to talk about one of the roses that grows here, because this is also a very interesting story. So maybe about 5 years ago, I was going through the plant list for the Ann Spencer garden, And I saw this rose and I had no idea what this rose was. So of course, I called my trusted companion and former teacher, Stephen Scaniello, who is the rosarian, the head rosarian at the New York Botanical Garden. And immediately, Stephen Scaniello knew what this rose was, because many, many, many years ago, he too had been wondering what this garden was, what this rose was in the garden. And he had gotten a cutting of this rose, and he had identified this rose as Rosa multiflora rosea, which he has now planted in Harlem at the Church of the Intercession in Harlem in the Cloister Garden. So here we have Anne Spencer's rose that was growing in Lynchburg, Virginia, that Stephen Scaniello found. He got a cutting of this many years before he even knew me. And he thought that this is a really important plant, and this is really important history. And I have to bring this to Harlem and plant this in Harlem at the Cloister Garden. And now anybody who knows Stephen knows he loves his work. And anybody who knows Stephen knows that he loves to teach everybody about roses. So here you have Anne Spencer's rose growing in Harlem in the Cloister Garden, with young African-American children tending to that garden with Stephen. Right before COVID, he and I were planning on having a group of people go and work with him, African-Americans go and work with him in this garden. And this was a new piece of information that we could share with them. And of course, COVID happened. But look at this history, you know, Anne Spencer starts her garden during Jim Crow times, you know, when it's hard to find plants. Who knows how she was finding plants at the time. And now all, in 2022, her roses are growing in Harlem and being tended to by young African-American children. So back to Ruth Norman, the concert pianist. As I was walking through the house yesterday, I saw all these photographs on the wall of all these luminaries from the Harlem Renaissance who lived in this house, who came through this house, who spent nights in this house. And it immediately reminded me of Ruth Norman and the beauty of her house in Shepherd Park, because again, this is that same generation. So Ruth Norman would have been the children, a child of Anne Spencer, and she would have been seeing these people in her home as well. But in her home, this is Ruth Norman, and in her home in Shepherd Park in Washington, D.C., these are the people who came through the house. These are the people who lived, in that area or had family in that area. So this is Leontine Price, whose brother, Brigadier General George B. Price, lived, down the street from Miss Norman. Denise Graves was her friend and was, always in there. Jessie Norman was in there. Now, I didn't even know who these people were, but their photographs are all in the walls in her house. Her house had the same furniture, the same wallpaper, the same smells as the smells that I had here, that I found here in Anne Spencer's house. And it was emotional to me because it made me realize that this is Black life. This is African-American life. This is the creativity and the artistry of African-American life, especially under the harshest conditions. So to me, walking into Shaun's grandma's house was like walking into Miss Norman's house, who was like my grandmother, when I moved here as a young African girl, and she took me in, as her piano student, and opened up this world to me that I never knew, 30 years down the line would be the reference point for my understanding of horticulture in America. So I think it's just wonderful. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to hear from Judge Ransom and Abra. And the thing that I want to really stress right now, somebody had a question about where is this corpus of knowledge being stored for future generations? And Guina, you said something about community activism. Well, these women that you are watching speak today, all 5 of us, all 6 of us, have our own community activism because we know what each other is working on. So for instance, if Terry knows that Abra is looking for some information and Terry finds that information, she immediately sends it over to Abra. If I find information, I will send it to Abra or send it to Shaun or send it to Terry, because this is the community and it is organic, because we want each other to win. We want Abra's book to come out. We want all that knowledge to be with Abra, if I have information that I've been collecting for 10 years and I realize that this is not serving me for my purpose, I send it to Abra. So this is how we work as community, as Black women. And I'm very thankful to be a part of it. So again, thank you so much for hearing me talk, and moving on, we can hear from Terry, who is behind me. Thank you.
Thank you, Wambui. Now I'm going to share. Okay, let's talk about African American garden clubs yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We've got big shoes to fill, y'all. We really, really do. Today's garden clubs, which I'm a member of the Capitol Hill Garden Club in Washington, D.C. I was former vice president. Now, post-COVID, and even during COVID, I started Jabali Amani Garden Collective. Why? Because of what garden clubs provide: education, resources, networking opportunities for each member to promote the love of gardening. And we've got members in New Jersey, in South Carolina, and Virginia, and even in Maryland. We promote floral design, and we, because of our predecessors, have a civic responsibility to the environment. It is our passion. Thank you for these pictures, Guina. Look at these women. They're not all gussied up, but you can bet your bottom dollar they are solving some of the problems of the day, because look at their stature, arms crossed, looking like, look at these plants behind me, y'all. We got this. And look down the street. It's not just them, it is community. And look at these women. Do they act like they have a care in the world? No. Why? Because they have planted what they found beautiful for them in their community. Now, she could have had on pants, but no, she has her heels on. She is on a step stool in her dress, her finery, while the youngins are looking on. Why? Because they are learning by example, which is what we need to be doing, setting examples for our youth so that they know they got this too. And sharing. This child may not remember whatever bloom this woman is sharing with him, but he will remember that she shared. That is what we need to be doing. As Wambui said, as Judge Ransom said, as Abra said, we can't keep it all to ourselves. Else, if that happens, we will never know. And isn't it about time we tell our own story? Just mentioning the efforts and this mission, I ran across a lady, Alyssa Peacock Leonard. She reached out to me, maybe because I was crying when I got my copy of the Negro Garden Handbook. I don't know. I can't remember. But we have developed a conversation. And she shared this with me. This is a garden club in Nashville, Tennessee. And I want to give a shout out to Blanche Enix. She was a teacher. And she felt the importance of coordinating a garden club. So she reached out to another teacher, Ruth McAlpin. These two women decided we need to do what garden clubs do: educate, build community, share tips and tricks. You know how we do it. And then there was Ruth Grant. Her husband was a doctor, Dr. William Grant. Dr. Grant thought, maybe you guys should call this Ardent Gardeners. Thus the name. It was that simple. Now, you tell me, why can't you create a garden club in your community? This is what we've always done. African-American men and women built community. Traditionally, this might be what you think a garden club looks like. And even me, in supporting Ethel Early Clark, these women showed up in their hats and finery. But guess what? You don't need a hat and finery. Just show up. That is the main thing. You got to show up. Anyone can form a garden club, and you can dress as fine as you want or not. The main objective is to gather, share the stories, collect the stories, and have a good time doing so. And a garden club can even look like this. These are young people. Now, they may not have a formal meeting, and they might have a formal meeting. They might dress up to go to a garden nearby or not, but they're having a good time. The face of garden clubs of yesterday and today, this is how they will look going forward. And this is how they will look going forward. Get your youngsters involved. It doesn't matter the age. My daughters learned because as I was a founding farmer of a community supported agriculture group. So they knew about bugs, pests, indoor worm composting, which was interesting at best. But they also, even now, can tell you, Mommy, spring is coming because the dogwoods are in bud. Yeah, they will retain what you teach them when you teach them in community. And this is what a garden club can look like. You don't know what this young man's future could be. He could be an entomologist. He could be a gardener. He could become a horticulturist. He could become a garden writer. He can be anything he wants to be, but it is up to us to set an example of communicating about the garden one by one. It is so important. I think each of us women realizes that we all have something in common. We grew up with our grandmas involved in our lives. We grew up with somebody, whether we gardened by their side or even chatted about gardening. There's something in your grandmama's garden that you remember. In South Carolina, I remember a white iris. I also remember hydrangeas by the door. In North Carolina, I remember pig farms and hydrangeas by the door. I also remember growing up on Eastern Avenue in Great Washington, DC, with 2 blue hydrangeas by the door. So you see, I love hydrangeas, and I was at my daddy's knee because I was a girl and I couldn't get dirty as he gardened, but I planted seeds with my mom. Which brings me to a book that I recently wrote, Black Flora. Once again, how many plants do we remember from our grandmother's gardens and what we did and did not like about them? How many of us grew up going down south in the summer, which we don't do anymore, shameful, because that's where a lot of us got our foundations, mindlessly wandering about. With me, it was looking at cows in the next pasture. But these visions, these memories of being outside in nature, what happened to that? Well, each of the candidates in my book had a memory with grandma, with mama, going out to parks, and it has definitely made a difference in their lives, and they shared it. The gardens provided healing for some, provided a voice for others, provided an artistic outlet for some. I want to give a shout out to Braun because I know Braun, the flower guy, the young man with the blue jacket and the bike, does not like blue hydrangeas, but you know what? He remembered that from his grandmama's garden. That's what's so amazing. These 3 women in Oklahoma, let me tell you, their story is amazing. And it all comes from growing up in a garden space. We can do this for the future of garden clubs, African Americans gathering to garden, and more. It is amazing how even growing up and with your children in the garden, imagine if you follow the Cottons on Instagram, their children are in the garden with them. And let me tell you, their children will have a memory, whether it's falling over a wheelbarrow, playing in the mud, but they were at their parents' knee. Their parents are doing this by choice to show them it doesn't take a corporate job, a mega estate to be one with nature and have a good time doing so. And for social activism, Talia, let me tell you, the things that we can change. Imagine for some of the communities that we grew up in that maybe a highway divided. Just think if maybe a garden club or a garden collective had just been present to speak up and say, not in my backyard, we know that term. Imagine maybe the highway would have been redirected and we could have spent more time beautifying where we live. When we invigorate and reimagine the African American garden clubs, we grow a sense of pride and we connect with each other via the garden. We sow seeds that are fertilized by the next generation because, as I showed you, the garden clubs, the face of garden clubs has changed over time and continues to change. We share the knowledge in community about the importance of civic responsibility and engagement for change. If we do not speak up now, changes are going to keep happening in our communities and we will have no say. Let's change that trajectory of downward spiraling to an upward spiral like a vine. We plant knowledge in the minds of our youth about the possibility of the future. As a garden writer and as a woman who is passionate about engaging community to grow more and be more than what we are now, there are many times I am the only one of color in the room. We can change this. We can change it in garden clubs. We can change it in horticulture. We can change this, but we've got to share our stories with any other women that are speaking today so that we can definitely make an impact and leave an impression that is going to be mindful for everyone that thinks about gardening and African Americans. I'm going to turn it back to you, Guina.
Thank you, Terry, so much. Thank you. I'm encouraged. I know the work that we're doing is really powerful. And there's so many garden clubs throughout the United States and in Philadelphia, let's say community garden clubs, garden collectives, growing and really cultivating so many things. So thank you so much. We're going to take a break in a moment, a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll hear from Shaun Spencer-Hester, the granddaughter of Ann Spencer. Before then, though, I really want to thank all of you for participating and encourage you to put any questions or comments in the chat. When we come back, we will address those questions. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone and thank you for the contributions and the beautiful images. I do want to give out a shout out to Penny Baker. She's the archivist at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. And so some of the images that we've seen today came from our collection. So again, thank you all. Thanks everybody for being here, and don't go away because we've got more to share. So just take a break, maybe get some water, stretch, do what you need to do, and I'll see you in 8 minutes. Thank you again. Hello, everybody. So I realize some of you may not have stepped away to take a break. So I really would like to engage you during this time. So in the chat, I want to hear what you're growing this gardening season and what you recommend to grow and what seeds you would share. I think that that's really an important aspect of us keeping gardening alive. And so it's springtime. What's in bloom besides the spring ephemerals? What do you have growing? And who would you engage in your garden this year? Really to get others, new gardeners involved. So please share in the chat so we can shout that out for everyone. And again, I want to thank Abra, Terry, Wambui, Judge Ransom, myself for being present here today, us all working together to uplift and unearth African-American gardens and garden history. Let's see, who's growing what? Oh, I see folks are growing the spring ephemerals. So the tulips are up now, the daffodils are up now. That's really beautiful. The hyacinths have been coming in, the muscari is in. That's really, really lovely and very encouraging. What other plants do people have growing? Let's see, I put a lot of blue and yellow pansies to support Ukraine. How beautiful. The wholesalers said they are having trouble keeping them in stock because so many people are buying blue and yellow plants. That's so beautiful. You know, one thing about gardening and the gardening community is, in fact, we are a community. And I think what we're uplifting here today, you know, is the fact that we all are connected, and the softness and beauty of plants and flowers really brings that home. So thank you for the work that you're doing to uplift humanity and planting these beautiful blue and yellow flowers. I hear folks are growing hellebores. That's fun. My yarrow is coming back, and little red dogwood bush is starting to get its leaves. Isn't that exciting? You could tell like spring is on its way. I'm here in Philadelphia and it's been cold. And so I'm not totally convinced that spring is on its way. But when I look at the plants and see things budding, then I am convinced. And I feel hopeful that there'll be warm weather consistently soon come. Let's see here. Spirea are beautiful golden yellow. Peas and salad greens, radishes are coming up. I just love my little violets, purple and blue. That's so beautiful. In this presentation, is this presentation being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded. And you've registered to participate in this event, and you will get the recording to look at this presentation again. So thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to start again in the next 2 minutes, talking with Shaun Spencer-Hester, and she's going to share with us the beautiful garden of Ann Spencer, her grandmother. Social activism is really important, and today, there are so many things to be passionate about and so many things to hold the mantle to. And so in the African-American community, we are uplifting each other, and food security and food scarcity and the access to healthy food is really, really very, very important. And so for gardeners everywhere, sharing your bounty, I think, is really important. With PHS, we have a city harvest program, and that city harvest program shares food to food cupboards and people in need. And I know for certain that across the US, there are other programs similar to our city harvest program where folks are sharing produce, and it's necessary. It really, really is necessary. So thank you so much. In a moment, we'll begin and we'll talk again with Shaun Spencer-Hester. And then after Shaun's presentation, all of us will come together in a panel to answer any questions that you have and share any additional information about Ethel Early Clark. I want to share with you guys that this weekend in Lynchburg, Virginia, at the Ethel Early Clark Garden and Museum, the speakers are there, and there is a garden open day being sponsored by the Garden Conservancy, and all are welcome. You just got to get to Lynchburg, Virginia, and Shaun will be delighted to have you there. So please join us in celebration of Ethel Early Clark and all the other founding gardeners in the African American community. So I think we're ready to get started. Again, my name is Guina, and I'm happy to be a part of this panel. Today, Shaun is going to be sharing with us the work and legacy of her grandmother, Ann Spencer. Shaun resides in Lynchburg, Virginia. She is an artisan, a historian, a fashion designer, an interior designer, a museum curator, a playwright, social and community advocate. Shaun is currently the executive director and curator at the Ann Spencer House and Garden Museum, and she is recognizing her grandmother, Ann Spencer, who was a Harlem Renaissance poet and the first African-American female and Virginian to be honored in the Northern Anthology of American Poetry. Everybody, please join us in welcoming Shaun in her presentation.
Thank you, Ghana.
You're welcome.
Just gonna get started right here.
Shaun, we can hear the audio from your video.
Know how to get back here. But I don't know how to do that. Can you help me, Terry? Do I need to just go out and come back?
Shaun, I think you might have to take out your headphones.
Take out your headphones.
Hmm?
So you might have to take out your headphones. I mean, take them off your computer.
Or just unplug them from the computer because the sound from the video is being
Can you
directed
hear
into your
me?
phone.
Yeah, hear me. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You can?
Yeah, we can hear you speaking. I think it just might be the audio from your recording. If you're relying on it to come out of your speakers from your computer to go in, then you'll need to unplug your headset. There is also a share audio from your computer option as well, but try unplugging your headset and starting again.
I did unplug my headset.
Just start again.
Start again. Stop share, start again.
Start again.
Okay, let's try this again.
Should be an option instead of share audio.
I don't see that. Share video.
Sounds says, they can hear you now.
I can't hear you.
How much this will eventually allow the family access to avenues outside the spiritual deadening existence of Lynchburg, and that such a contact with fruit,
I can't hear.
or aim. This Spencer characterized Bishop Johnson as an act of God, to be sure, her life between 1920 and 1940 was spiritually stimulated as a direct consequence of her friendship with Johnson. Who sat down the bill secretary of the skill secretary of the James Gordon Johnson. And Spencer realized that he was also the lawyer. Sterling Brown. Let's read in the gardens. Yes. The garden, dirty slide, I'm gonna be talking. So straight.
But can you hear it? What you doing? We can hear it.
Shaun, you might have to speak. Your audio of your video isn't really working well. You might have to, just like speak over it with your own voice because we really can't hear the audio from your video.
Can you hear me talking now?
Yeah, we can hear you talking, but we can't hear the audio from the video you made. So if you could maybe narrate it as you're going, that'd be great.
Okay. So we're walking now into the sunroom. It's this room. Looking out the window out of the sunroom was added on the 1920s. My grandparents' garden, and I say it's my grandparents' garden. This was a garden the two of them, my grandfather Edward and my grandmother Anne, cultivated together. On Sundays, they took car rides out into the countryside and dug up Virginia flora and brought it home into their garden, which is why there's so much of that. You walk down this brick driveway is how you enter into the garden of Anne Spencer's garden. She cultivated this garden every day in her poetry. She found refuge in this garden, what Abra said, from the ugliness of the outside world. She wrote, "The garden is half my world. I am nothing to it when all is said. I will plant the thorn and kiss the rose, and they will grow when I am dead." We passed the rose garden here, which was once a vegetable garden. And we'll enter through this gate here, the robin's egg blue wooden lattice fence that Edward upcycled from the house back porch enclosure. And you saw that kitty cat run across. We have lots of garden cats in the garden and also around the house. There are many other structures here in the garden that Edward upcycled, an arbor and pergola. Today you'll see on the arbor wisteria. At one time, my grandmother had roses. Wambui spoke about that this garden, it was an evolving garden. It was always, it didn't stay the same. There were things that she moved around and plants that she changed and moved, probably maybe because of the sun or it was doing better in one place or another. You'll see here the grape arbor. That she had 3 varieties of grapes, Keiko, Concord, and Niagara. Today, I think we have 2 varieties that still remain in this garden. By the summer, we will have grapes on this grape arbor. Right now, you'll see a few grape leaves there. There were a few rules in this garden that I had as a little girl. And one of the rules was that not to eat the grapes. The grapes were for the birds, for the purple martin colony that came every spring to this garden. You'll see here one of the remaining 4 of the purple martin birdhouses. Edward was and Ann Spencer were truly bird people. They had also birds inside their home, not just outside. They also healed people's birds in the community. This is a historic garden. It is the only known restored garden of an African American in the United States of America. When I say that, it gives me some sense of pride, but it also, I am not prideful because I know that there are other African American gardens in the United States that are just waiting to be restored. Here at the pond, we just looked at the bust head, metal head there of Prince Ebo. He was a gift from W.E.B. Du Bois, and he spits water from his mouth. We're still using Edward's engineered underground water system that runs water to this pond. This pond place here, where Prince Ebo is, it was a gift from W.B. Du Bois, was one of my grandparents' favorite places to sit and look at their garden. There was a story that my father used to tell about the Igbo people, that it was a small tribe that was captured and they were brought to Sapelo Island, Georgia, the king and also his village. And when they got to Sapelo, they were all chained together. And instead of the king walking them into slavery, they walked into the water. Now, the Igbo peoples believed that they believed in reincarnation, and possibly they believed that they walked into the water, they would be reincarnated and their spirits would leave their body and go home. Well, this folklore story was proven to be a true story. A scholar did research and proved that this actually happened. There were just descendants of these people that died in this water, descendants who survived, that they still heard voices in the water. This is what inspired me to kind of look into African-American garden clubs. I just wondered if my grandmother was a member of a garden club. I found these papers here in her archives, this 2-page garden club, Springtime, the first annual flower show program that was presented by the Federation of Garden Clubs of Lynchburg and held on the May 5th, 1952 at 4 p.m. at the Phyllis Wheatley YWCA right here in Lynchburg on Monroe Street. You know, I was curious, was she a member of this club or was she just a guest? You know, and so I looked around and found some newspapers, and this is particularly interesting to me because the Hillside Garden Club maintains this garden for us today. They are responsible for the restoration of this garden, actually 2 restorations of this garden. But I found that in 1969, April 5th, that the Hillside Garden Club actually did a collaborative effort to improve their community with the White Club. The White Club was the Hillside, and the Progressive Garden Club was my grandmother's club. So even back then, they did not know that these 2 clubs, and the Hillside Garden Club and Ann Spencer, worked together. If you go down the street, you'll see some of those remaining dogwoods that they planted together. This is showing Ann Spencer down in the photograph of the Lynchburg Jack and Jill Club. I'm here in Lynchburg. It was a national club. It was a club that they used to lift up their children, to teach them etiquette, to teach them to be people that can work together in a group, in a committee, and do things together. And and also, you'll see also that the men are pictured here as well. The Lynchburg fathers host their children, and they hosted these clubs, my grandparents, in their garden. My grandmother also taught this man here to the side. This is Adabinga. He was a pygmy. He was brought. He was exhibited in the St. Louis. He was in the World's Fair and also in the Bronx Zoo. And he was brought to Lynchburg in 1906 by some Baptist ministers here. And Ann Spencer, because she was a graduate of the Virginia Seminary and associated with some of these Baptist seminaries, taught Adabinga how to read and write. It was there's a lot of information about Adabinga, a tragic story about a human being being exhibited in our own Bronx, New York Bronx Zoo. So this, tells a little bit about Anne Spencer's escape into her garden. Inside Eden Crawl, and Eden Crawl is a made-up word. They combine their two names together, Edward and Anne. It's kind of pun on the Garden of Eden. Crawl is a word, South African word. I also understand it's a Dutch word that means corral, enclosure. If you look at, go to a village in Africa, or they very often have a fence to keep animals in, keep enemies out. But on these walls inside her writing studio are photographs of family and friends. That's me right there with my hands up in the air, wishing my grandmother a happy birthday, and my sister. But my grandmother didn't like a lot of photographs in the house. This is where she kept them thumbtacked on the wall. We would come here to visit her in the summers, and we'd bring her our new school picture, and she'd give us a thumbtack, and we'd press it hard into the wall, and that's where it would stay. These are all copies of original photographs that are part of the Anne Spencer collection that are held here at the Anne Spencer House and Garden Museum. Her larger collection is held at the University of Virginia in the Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections Library there. This is a little piece, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That creativity fell on down to me, my work here in the museum. This is a kind of a little rumble seat of my dad's that I made to cover the new HVAC system. This is Lady Bird Johnson, her daughter Linda Bird, who came here when the house was dedicated a Virginia Historic Landmark and registered on the National Register of Historic Places in 1977. The Anne Spencer House and Garden Museum is the most intact house museum of African American in the United States. We appreciate any help that we can get to sustain the historic garden and house museum. It is a living and breathing thing. There is always something to repair and patch and paint. If you'd like to donate, you can donate to the AnneSpencerMuseum.com/donate. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. Bless you, Terry. And it is important, as the ladies before me have expressed to you, to preserve our Black history. Our Black history is American history. And if you find anything in your basements and your attics and you can't get it to us, take it to some place that you can have it copied, and possibly check with the local library that you can have it preserved there. Anne Spencer was a poet, as you've heard. She was a civil rights activist. She was really more of an advocate more than an activist. She founded the Lynchburg chapter of the NAACP in the living room. She was a teacher and a librarian at Dunbar High School, wife, mother, and also my loving grandmother. More than 30 of her poems were published in her lifetime, making her an important figure of the Black literary and cultural movement of the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance, and only the second African-American poet to be included in the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry in 1973. Anne Spencer wrote this poem: "Being a Negro woman is the world's most exciting game of taboo. By hell, there is nothing you can do that you want to do, and by heaven, you are going to do it anyhow. We do not climb into Jim Crow galleries or scenario houses. We stay away and read. I read garden and seed catalogs, Browning, Housman, Whitman, Saturday Evening Post, Detective Tales, Atlantic Monthly, American Mercury, Crisis, Opportunity, Vanity Fair. Oh, anything. I can cook delicious things to eat. We have a lovely home, but one that money did not buy. It was born and evolved slowly out of our passionate, poverty-stricken agony to own our own home. Happiness." If you'd like to donate, you can take your phone, you can put it right here on the screen. It will take you right to the donate page. And we appreciate all of your donations. And we cannot continue our preservation and restoration efforts without your generous support and donations. And donations can come in many ways. They can come in, as money, they can come as in kind, they can come as volunteering. We're always looking for volunteers at the Ann Spencer Museum. So if you're local, we'd love for you to stop by sometime. So thank you for spending your time with us today. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. When it first started, I had butterflies in my stomach. Just so exciting to have all these meet Wambui and Terry and Lillian, and Abra and Guina, to spend this last maybe 6 months or 7 months that we have been together planning this program for you and sharing our information with you. And so we hope that you'll share your information with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you, Guina.
Thank you all. Thank you. We're going to do our question and answer now. So everyone, please come on the screen and we can address any of the questions that folks have. And again, I just want to say thank you so much to the Morris Arboretum and to Chanticleer for really hosting us and supporting us and providing all of the technical support and background support that we've needed. And Abra, thank you for bringing all of us together to share this important history. And you guys, I know that you all have a wonderful weekend at the Ann Spencer House and Museum and Garden. And you'll be inviting others in for the open conservancy, the Open Garden Conservancy Day. And we have some beautiful tote bags that you guys have made with the Ann Spencer or the Ethel Day, Ethel Early Clark emblem and the Peace Rose.
We're going to show you one.
Oh, you're going to show it? Okay, great. And so let's see, what questions do we have? If you guys want to put questions in the chat, that would be really great. Oh, hey, there's the Ethel Day tote bag, right? Oh, it's so beautiful. It's a nice garden bag, actually. It's really a fun thing to have. So if you're out in the garden and you got all these tools and things that you want to put together and keep them together, that Ethel bag is perfect. So give thanks for that design and working with us to do that. Let's see, anyone have any questions for us? Or you guys, how about you start with something else you would like to say or add to the presentations that we've done? Anyone? So there is one question that I see. They want to know the hours of the Ann Spencer Garden and Museum. When is the garden open, Shaun?
So we will open officially this Tuesday for Lynchburg Garden Day. In Virginia, we have a whole week of garden fun throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So on Tuesday is Lynchburg's Day. So we will be open on that day from 10 to 3. And it is only a $5 donation to enter. And we're very excited because we have been closed, during COVID and just trying to maintain and keep the lights on and do all that. So we just want to, we're just happy to have people just come back. Of course, the garden is a public garden. It is open 7 days a week, sunrise to sunset. As I showed you in the video, you just walk down that driveway, come into the garden. There's Wi-Fi into the garden. There's seating. It's just a beautiful place to come, sit, reflect, write poetry, play music. Just whatever you want to do, as long as it's legal.
For sure. Thank you. Wambui, what you gonna say?
Yes, somebody asked about Ruth Norman. Oh, 1 second. Could you turn your volume?
Yes.
Wait, we can't hear you now.
Now you can hear me.
Yes.
Sorry. Somebody asked about Ruth Norman, and I wanted to just say that no, Ruth Norman was not a relative of Jesse Norman, but they were very good friends. And I talked about Ruth Norman because that neighborhood in Shepherd Park was a neighborhood of African American families who gardened, who had beautiful gardens. And if anybody lives in Washington, D.C. or is from Washington, D.C., of a certain age, then you do know the importance of Shepherd Park in, you know, African American life, in African American thought, in African American artistry, and for me, like I said, my introduction to American plants was through a Black woman who looked very much like Ann Spencer, who looked very much like Shaun's mother. I just told Shaun Ruth Norman could have been her mother, you know. So I just thought it was so wonderful when it all came full circle, you know, and realizing that this is what Black people do everywhere and what Black women do in particular. So thank you. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Terry, someone wants to know about CSAs and if you can recommend a CSA in Washington.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. There are CSAs everywhere. So you can go online, there's community, and it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. So if you want to reach out to me, I can help you find one. But basically, look in your general area. It is different than a community garden. A community garden, the community comes together and gardens collectively. And you could also start a garden club in a community garden. Community supported agriculture, you pay a price for X number of weeks of produce or flowers. And each week you get a single serving or a double serving, whatever you pay for. You pick it up. That's what CSA stands for. So that's what that means. I think earlier there was a question about what is the difference between a collective and a club. Okay. We call ourselves a collective just to be different. That's the beauty of a garden club. You can call yourself whatever you want, you know, as a collective, because we're not all just from Maryland, where I'm located. A collective, we are collecting the voices of our sisters and our brothers everywhere. So that way the conversation can be shared. I know a lot of different things about growing in different zones. So my South Carolina member will get different information from me, maybe some different seeds. Maybe her bloom time is earlier than mine because she's in a different zone than I am. That's the only difference.
Very nice. Thank you. Terry, excuse me, Shaun, someone wants to know about the color of the pergola in the garden and the fence there. They're asking about the hue, the color, and is that color significant to Ann Spencer at all?
Thank you, Guina. The color blue is a color that we scraped down, like one of the columns I showed you on Eden Crawl. When the Hillside Garden Clubs were restoring the garden, we were talking, when we looked at pictures, they were of course all in black and white, but in black and white pictures, you can kind of see the hues changing a little bit. And we also saw that one time there was a different fence other than the lattice fence, and it had polka dots. It had little, circles. It was a real creative place. But we scraped down on this original post and we found red and we found white, but then we found this blue. And when we found the blue, it was unanimous. This was the color that we wanted to bring to this garden. For me, as an African American, I knew that this blue had meaning behind it to our culture. Sometimes you'll see this color, particularly down in Charleston or in the South, they'll paint their front porches underneath or this blue or, and this blue is known to kind of keep evil spirits away. Also, sometimes you'll read that this blue will keep mosquitoes away. Now, I haven't been able to prove that in the Ann Spencer garden, but I do believe that it does definitely bring good energy.
Very nice, thank you. There's a comment in the chat that says, you know, us sharing the history, but also the connection of our ancestors, our grandparents, really is apropos to Earth Day today. So it really, or the celebration of Earth Day. So it really is about the acknowledgement of keeping legacy going and really keeping pride going and really sharing education and the movement forward. So I think we're all doing this work. So it really is super fantastic. Also, someone said in the chat that Judge Ransom's club history is really fascinating, and that the community gardens in Norfolk, Virginia, also recognize that azalea garden was built by African Americans and African American women. And the celebration and acknowledgement of that is something new that's occurring now. And so I know that we can unearth many histories of contributions that African Americans have made. And so as we move forward, you know, really thinking about what history do we want to create moving forward. And so if you guys could think about that or answer that question, like what legacy do you want to create and leave behind? Abra.
The legacy I want to create and leave behind, I think, is just a joyous, uplifting, happy one. And only because it really is, that's been my experience in life. I mean, it's just been a life filled with nature, horticulture, rural Georgia, Atlanta, the trees there. So that's what I center my research on. I'm not oblivious to the fact that there were a lot of things going on politically during these times. However, I don't reduce a person's life to what was happening in America, in the world during those times. No different than I want someone to reduce my life to that, because I've lived an extraordinary life and I want people to focus on those things. So that to me is what Black horticulture in America, it's not a one-sided story. There's many stories. It's not just trauma. It is certainly a lot of Black joy to that as well. And that is not to ignore the traumatic things that have clearly happened. So it's just a lot. It's just a lot of ways to look at things, Guina. So that's my answer to that.
Very nice. Great answer for sure. Wambui, what about you? We can't hear you.
No, I keep on muting myself. Legacy-wise, I think for me, it's just to see more women working together. When women work together, we do great things. Before I met these women on screen, every one of them was working hard at what she was interested in. And when we got together, something bigger happened. So women working together, women working the right way, and hearing African-American stories from the people who lived them and who lived them. Because that is then you get the true essence, you know. Or when you find information that you know would be of benefit to people who are searching for it, you help them. It's all about just working together and sharing for me.
Mm-hmm. Very nice indeed. Terry?
You hear me? Okay. Oh, don't get me started.
Uh-oh.
The legacy that I want to leave is that it is important for us to share our story in our voice. I cannot emphasize that enough. There's a question in the chat that speaks to why was this just out of Virginia? Well, I've been trying to research Negro garden clubs in the DC area. And you know what I've come up with? Zip, that's a zero, for nada. Not because I haven't tried to really dig deeply, but because we're not talking about it. We need to be excited about this. We need to talk about this. The joy that is found in the garden, the peace that comes from garden, the healing that comes from gardens and gardening. Look at our communities. We need some healing going on. The best place to become healed, connect with the earth. The earth is our gift. It's a present every single day. But you have to be in touch with it. You have to touch it, be a part of it, feel it, give thanks to it in order to reap the benefits of it. So my legacy, anyone that comes around me knows you're going to hear about gardening sooner or later, because that's what I eat, breathe, and sleep. I appreciate the gift of gardening, and I appreciate the genetic remembrance from these hands, from my ancestors, my sharecropping roots, and I'm going to pay it forward any way and every way that I can. And that's the short version.
That was beautiful. I want to say you could continue. You could just go on and on about that because it's really true. It's so beautiful. And Shaun, what do you want to share with us?
Oh, that's your turn.
Guina, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you, but I think you were asking me.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, my legacy. Listen, I'm living my grandmother's legacy.
Okay,
You know, I can. The only thing that I want to do is to continue the legacy. I want to, you know, to preserve it, restore this historic site, preserve the story, keep, you know, just, you know, if we, you know, even though we're a 501c3 nonprofit, we have a living, breathing garden that is ever changing and growing and has great cultural meaning, you know, behind it, and great history behind it. And that is, and it's, you know, I talked a little bit, just mentioned it in my program, that this is African-American history, but this is American history.
Yeah.
You know, we are Americans, and it is our story that is part of that thread that that we have to continue to. We have to tell our own story first of all. We can't wait for somebody else to tell our story, and it's important for us to tell our story. When it comes from somebody else, another culture, another ethnic background, it's not the same. They can tell my story, but they can't, verbally is what I'm saying, but they can't, they don't feel my story. They don't really know my story. And the only reason they can tell my story is because I've told them my story. Yes. So it's just a reiteration of that. So the legacy is, it's just really simple. It's just to continue on what we have here, not just here, but we have rich in our African-American communities. We have rich in our African-American culture. And we have to, you know, teach these children how to water a plant. And it may not be that plant that, like, you know, you talked about, Terry, it may not be that plant that they remember watering. It may be that smell that they remember. You know, it may be that one little thing that, oh, mama, you took me to the park. Didn't have anything to do with the flower that you were, you know, that they were introduced to. So that's the legacy that we have to continue on with our children and those generations to, you know, to teach them, even, and not even just the young people, even, you know, there was a question today, the Hillside Garden Club was in this garden today, where we were sitting inside this cottage, working in this garden, these white garden club members, and they are keeping this legacy alive. So it's not just our responsibility, it is everybody's responsibility to keep each other's legacies alive, because we are all part of this common thread of being an American. in here.
Mhm. So beautiful. Thank you. Wambui?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Now we can't. You.
I always have to mute because if I don't, then we have an echo. So I'm so sorry.
Okay, no worries.
So Christopher Sheridan had a question about African American plant breeders, and Terry might have more to say. But in my research and reading, I find that there are so many plants that people's parents grew. And there's a wonderful author, Walter Mosley, who many of you I'm sure know, and who many of you have read, who had a wonderful wrote a wonderful article about his father, who was a gardener out in California. He was a Southern gentleman who lived in California, in LA in the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And he had bred a dahlia, I believe it was a blue dahlia. And, you know, he had worked on this dahlia for years and years and years. And finally, they had this beautiful dahlia in their garden. Of course, Walter Mosley doesn't live there anymore. And it was always in the back of my mind to someday figure out where that house was and if that dahlia still grows there. So this is what people do, you know. So yes, there are very many African-American plant breeders, I am sure. I'm sure probably Abra knows some, Terry knows some, but this is how people do it. They do it in their backyards. The orchid, Abra, who's the man, the orchid collector? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Thank you. And I'm gonna mute myself again.
Oh, you're talking about John Hope Franklin. Yes, there are plant breeders, and sometimes when you're looking through historical documentation, it'll talk about the Black person who bred a plant. For example, a camellia. I can think of a rose. I forgot the I can't say the name in French, but some of the records say that this Black man in Charleston is the one that that figured it out. And then if you look at the rose now, it's not credited. So a lot of times they're not credited for their work because they're either laborers or they're enslaved. So that happened all the time. And there were certainly Black people that own nurseries, and not just one or two, many. So I think there's this idea too that Black folks just always went and got plants out of the woods, and that's just not true. There were many Black women that owned nurseries, and there were white nurseries that sold to Black people and kept their nurseries open during the Great Depression by being supported by Black people. So the answer to your question is yes, there were certainly Black, and still are, Black plant breeders.
Mhm. So much to do, huh? So like it continues. Our work continues. It always continues. Just teaching the young people, but also teaching ourselves. I mean, because we're all gardeners, you know, we're professional gardeners, and we know, but sometimes we don't know the history and the contributions. And so I think as we learn more, then we can even share more and can help with our garden designs, our practices, really our practices. So we're talking about ornamental gardening, but also vegetable growing, you know, and so in today's world, like that natural food source is really important. And so I think sharing that information and keeping that alive and getting more people involved really helps support the world that we live in. So as we think about the world today and the struggles, and the challenges, I think gardening is a place that is a peaceful place where we all can come, wherever you come from, really to find a commonality. So again, I thank you guys so much for this opportunity. Abra, thank you for bringing us together. Chanticleer, thank you for bringing us together. The Morris Arboretum, you know, thank you. And I know the Morris and Chanticleer both, you know, have some fun facts in history of contributions that were made in their organizations. I know that Henry Skinner, you know, he contributed to the book, the Negro Gardens book, and also Adolph Rosengarten used to teach young people weeding and reading, and that was a program that he did really to teach folks about the cultures and the world around them. And so I think that we're all doing that. And I give thanks for all of us really uplifting the work that we're doing. So I appreciate you all. I look forward to seeing you all in the garden. And I know that you guys will have such fun this weekend at the Ann Spencer House and Garden. And thank all of our participants for joining us today. So thank you guys, and be well and happy gardening.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're done. Bye.
Thanks, Guina. You did super.
Give thanks. Are we done? I think we're done.
We don't want to leave each other.